was George Washington? "1783, after long years of fighting, the war was finally over. American soldiers had beaten the mighty British Army. The 13 colonies were independent now." Ships full of British soldiers sailed back to England. From here on, nobody in America had to obey King George. There was going to be a brand new country with 13 United States. And in 1789, when it came time to elect the first president, who was the number one choice? George Washington, of course. George Washington had been the top general throughout the war. He was not the kind of general who just gave orders and then watched soldiers do all the fighting. He was often in thick of battle, yet Washington was never wounded, not once. Besides being brave, he was also smart, loyal, honest, and fair. Everything a leader should be. Would the war have won without him? Many people didn't think so. It was not a surprise that he won the first election for president. But when he learned the news, he was not happy. Oh no, he wasn't happy at all. He loved being back in Virginia at Mount Vernon, his beautiful home. When he was 57 years old and hoped to spend the rest of his life there with his wife, Martha, and her 2 youngest grandchildren. As the very first president, so much would be expected of him. And strange as it may seem to us, George Washington worried that he wasn't up to the job. No, the job of president was not at all to his liking. But many people said they would only support the new government if George Washington were president. And more than anything, he wanted the new government to work. So he said yes. He started off to New York, where he would take the oath of the office. At every stop along the way, there were parties and parades for him. Just what George didn't want. Today, politicians may spend years planning to run for president. Millions of dollars are spent on campaigns, yet the man who is known as the father of our country felt like a criminal going off to his execution. All he wanted was to stay home and go fox hunting. Chapter 1. A Boy from Virginia. On the night of February 22nd, 1732, Augustine Washington sat at the table by candlelight. A family Bible lay open before him. Gus, as everyone called him, was a tobacco farmer in the colony of Virginia. With a pen made out of quill of a turkey, he wrote down the name of his son, George, who had been born that very morning. George's mother, Mary, was Gus's second wife. His first wife had died, leaving him with 2 teenage sons. One night, not long before George was born, a bolt of lightning shot down the chimney of the Washington's farmhouse. It killed a woman who was visiting Mary. Mary worried that the lightning was a sign of bad luck. It might mean that there had been something wrong with her baby. But George was a strong, healthy baby. People said he looked like his mother. He grew into a tall, athletic boy who loved to ride horses. through the green countryside. In later years, he was known as the best horseman in Virginia. When George was about 7, the family moved to Ferry Farm. It was across the river from Fredericksburg, Virginia. By the time George had a younger sister, Betty, and 3 younger brothers, Samuel, John, and Charles. People said George and Betty looked a lot alike. As a grown woman, she would do funny imitations of her famous brother. There isn't any information how George and his father got along, but we do know he wasn't close to his mother, Mary Washington. His mother, Mary Washington, had been a cold, bossy woman. All George's friends were scared of her. Strangely, she never took pride in a famous lie. Many generations of school children learned the story of George Washington chopping down a cherry tree. On his family farm, when his angry father asked who had done such a terrible thing, George confessed right away. "I cannot tell a lie," he said. "Pa, it was I who chopped it down." The story showed how honest George was even as a small boy. The story, however, was entirely made up. Soon after Washington's death, a man named Madison Locke Weems wrote a book about the first president. Weems wanted Washington to seem perfect, and so he made up stories such as one about the cherry tree. It took him more than 100 years before the truth came out about the untruthful book. Her eldest son, not even after he became president, his letters to his mother would begin "Honored Madame" instead of "Dear Mother." And he never introduced his wife Martha to her. The person he loved best in the world was his kind half-brother Lawrence. Lawrence was Gus's oldest son. He was 14 years older than George. Lawrence had gone to school in England. He learned Greek and Latin. He knew how to dress like a gentleman and act like a gentleman. There wasn't enough money to send George off to England. Instead, they probably taught him at home, probably by his father Lawrence. George was great at math, anything with numbers. Came easily to him, but he was a terrible speller. It embarrassed him all his life. When George was only 11, his father died. From time to time, George was invited for long visits to Mount Vernon. This is home of Lawrence and his new bride, Anne Fairfax. George loved it there. In 1746, George was asked to move for good, and he went off. Probably he was happy to get away from his mother. The Washington family coat of arms, the Latin motto, means the outcome justifies the deed.